So we're doing the Nancy double feature, and that opening for the penultimate episode was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't we swirl into the shot? I feel like it turns, and then you're with Nancy and her dad as they're arguing about the fact that he kept this secret from her. And I paused, I think, a minute in because she displaced Kate immediately, and I was like, "Not your mama."
Yeah, that scene was, it's tough to watch because I feel like my instinct always, and I'm not proud of this, but like whenever some of these conversations come up, I'm like, ah. And I think it's just, I don't want to see the characters hurt like this because she's unpacking so much pain that just came at her like a Mack truck. Like it was in an instant, her whole existence just unraveled. But I'm like, I want, like, I understand what Carson and Kate did for her, why they did it for Lucy. And I'm like, I know that you can get to that point, but as a viewer, it's like, that's I think what's successful about it, because you can be frustrated. You're like, oh, they did something good, and there is a moral gray area because they did lie to you for 20 years, and I just wanted her to see it. But I loved how she walked through that, because for as much as we always get on Nancy's case about making questionable choices, she does have an emotional intelligence from time to time, because she knows herself better than anybody, and she knew, like, I need to process this alone. Her instinct is always to retreat and isolate whenever something happens. And she very much immediately did that. And I think it was less from a place of, I'm mad at you, please don't talk to me. It was more of a place like, you're trying to take the pain away, and nothing that you will say in this moment will change anything. And it's also kind of self-serving because you want me to feel better so that you feel less guilty, but I am not ready for that. So she's like, everybody, please leave me alone as I process this. And like she said to Ace, not to fast forward through all of this, but she was like, when I have the words, I will express them to you. So I thought that opening scene where she is just rightfully brutal to Carson, and even though I was like, I don't want you to hurt like this, Nancy, it was very necessary.
Yeah, to follow up on what I said about Stargirl earlier on, I love when a show picks right up after the cliffhanger because it doesn't skip the aftermath, and this very much let us sit with it. And yeah, I totally agree. You felt everything you could possibly feel for both characters, because you see all sides to the story, and that makes you conflicted because you're like, well, who do I resonate with more? Because I totally saw where Nancy was coming from, but at the same time, you understood the position Carson and Kate were in all those years ago. So how do you feel like angry towards either one of them when you totally understand where they're both coming from? And also, just, I know we're probably going to say it many times throughout this review, but like Kennedy's performance, oh my, like I felt like I was attacked in those first 2 minutes of the episode, and watching what is basically a bumper double length finale for us. We got attacked many times throughout those 2 episodes, but like, just to get attacked so soon, it really made you, it did really feel like the story was coming together, but at the same time, everything was unraveling, and you couldn't help but feel for everyone involved. But my goodness, what a performance from Canada.
And she deserves, I'm surprised she didn't get an award for this.
Right.
Because it is absolutely stunning work, the way her emotions build. And she does so well with I don't know how you describe it. It's like trying to put a top on a pot that's boiling over. Like, clearly Nancy has too many feelings to handle, which is why she's literally walking away, like running away from them. Like, we're in the kitchen, we're up the stairs, we're in the room, and then we're out the window after she closes the door on her dad. And Kennedy, I mean, that felt like a marathon scene. Like, she could have been over the top. She could have gotten there way too fast. And so by the time she gets to the emotional peak, she's done petered out. And instead, it just felt like soul crushing. It just felt like Carson, you just stop talking. Like, stop talking. She can't talk right now. So that she can leave. And then she does. And then the understanding she comes to at the end. By the way, Nancy's so mean. I love her, but those barbs are like, they're so cutting. But towards the end of the episode, when she tells her dad that she understands having a secret that you don't want anyone to know about, but then she just shoves the knife in deeper. But like she understands, but she's still not talking to you. Like, because also she told her secret because she had to. And I was just like, Kennedy, I don't know how you had to live in that headspace for that long, but that frustration of Nancy's and the scaredness there, she looks like a little girl whenever she's talking to Ryan and trying to piece together, like, would he have wanted me? How would he have felt? Like, let me just ask these questions that I really don't need to be asking, because she was asking questions that he should have been like, why are you asking me this? But he was just answering because it's Ryan and he doesn't keep more than 2 thoughts in his head most of the time. So like, I can't even say I like Ryan. I know the Ryan fans are probably going to get on me for that. But that has a lot to do with the unpacking of this man that they did in these 2 episodes. And at least in season 1, he's not a good person, like by any stretch of the imagination, but he clearly did love Lucy.
Mm-hmm. He did. Episode 17, the penultimate, is when he and Nancy go to that free clinic, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to go back to Kennedy's performance for a second and Nancy in this episode, I feel like she's gone through a lot of hard times this season, but this season Kennedy carries Nancy's emotions a lot differently. Like for the first time we see her just like depleted. Mm-hmm. Like there's something in her that just like someone blew the fire out, and it does kind of come back when she's kind of like, I need to solve this mystery and wrap this thing up. I'm exhausted. But there are so many scenes where like Nancy's present, she's taking in the information, but just you can tell she's been defeated by all of this and she's trying to keep going. And in those free clinic scenes, she's like playing a double agent. She's like, I'm just going to tag along with this guy to kind of see what this would be like, but not tell him. That was interesting though, because I thought she was going to tell him a lot sooner. I didn't think she was going to string him alone, but I'm glad that she did, because she got to see like, oh, okay, so that's how he acts in the wild. Trying to throw a checkbook everywhere.
Yeah, it was very interesting. The thing I enjoyed most about this episode, and its timing might be a little bit convenient, but was the fact that she needed a blood relative for the ritual. So that kind of forced everything forward. It forced her to have to address this, and it forced her to have to admit it to everyone else. Because of course, while Ace very much became a confidant and they'd be having their own secret meetings to talk about this, which of course we're about to get into, but everybody else did not need to know this, and it was her choice as to when to tell everybody, if she wanted to tell everyone. And yet this ritual forced all her hand. And I usually hate it when an episode feels like a waste at the end, but the fact that the ritual didn't work and yet it still forced that story forward, I thought that was a genius move, because it didn't kill any of the overarching story. The Igleka is still very much a big threat.
It did kill Owen though.
Very true, exactly. So the story is not over, but at the same time, that hurdle she had to get over about addressing that came and went because of the story. Her hand was forced, and it brought the conflict forward very nicely. And it basically left everyone stunned. Like, wait, why is Ryan here? That was like so much going on in that scene. And like Reed said, Nancy was depleted. She did not want to be there.
She was so casual about it when she said it. When was it? Someone was like, "Are you guys cousins or something?" And she was like, here's the quick recap. You know what? You're going to get the Cliff's Notes. I don't feel like explaining it. Let's just do this.
Well, and it was so emotional too, because we're literally in this like ritual where clearly she needs a blood relative, and she's not telling any of her friends why Ryan is even here. And so I think it was Bess who was like, "Are you cousins?" And she was like, "Nope." And she's like, nope. She's like, "Let's just read the thing." And Ace gave her such emotional support. In episode 17, I think 18 too. They're kind of mixing in my head right now.
Yeah.
But he was really just there as a pillar of strength for her. Like, he didn't go tell her business. He was, when she wasn't going to answer about who Ryan is to her, he said, let's just do the ritual. Just going to keep on going. But she's in so much, I love how the emotional pain she's in then has to translate into physical pain because of the ritual. And the way that her and Ryan's hands are at the start of it, where they're just pressed together and there's all that blood coming out. And then like they're holding on to each other's hands as she has to, through the pain, explain who Lucy is to her and who Ryan is to her now. And then the shock that ripples through their friend group was just a lot. I just think, to me, this episode was better than the finale, actually. Like the penultimate episode was so emotionally charged and so about Nancy. And they kept giving Kennedy these little scenes to just like blow up. So you have her blowing up by the car with Ryan when he's like, yeah, we should just let Owen die. And she's like, excuse me. And she's like, why are you like this? And she goes on that tirade, she calls him morally bankrupt. He's a legacy criminal who's into teenage
Blocked
girls. Yes, she did. And he was like, he got upset. He's like, you know what? Find your own way home. And I was like, you can't just leave her here. But he does.
Oof. I do want to, you did touch on his romantic situation with George. And that was a big thing that happened. And I wanted to touch on that because there was a part of me that was like, oh, this kind of feels like it's coming out of nowhere a little bit, but that's not at all. After I thought about it, I was like, no, this has been George's arc building. And I'm so glad that they did this, because a lot of times in television shows, especially ones from when we were growing up, they would always portray the older person dating the teenager as like sexy. And like, even if people were against it, they would still try to fight for it. And they never made a point to say that was not right. And there have been shows, even modern shows recently, that have fumbled that so hard. But to see George coming to that realization quickly, and it maybe some people will be like, oh, maybe she wouldn't have come to that clarity so quickly. That was just like a device for her and Nick to get together. But I was like, I think it was important for them, not only for George to come to this reckoning, but to portray this relationship that was in this season and to fully circle back to it and be like, no, that was not okay what he did with her, dating her when she was 17. And it did cause some emotional damage that she didn't realize at the time, because she was the one that was young. It reminded me of that new Demi Lovato song 29. I don't know if you guys have heard it, but as soon as she started having that conversation with Ryan, that song played in my head, because that's what it's about. It's about the wisdom that comes with age, when you're like, oh, that relationship I had as a teenager was not okay. And I'm only realizing this now, but I think it was very brave of her to tell him that and say, what you did was wrong, and I'm still dealing with that. And again, it's another person trying to take her pain away and be like, oh, I'm so sorry. And she's like, I don't want anything from you. I'm here to tell you, for me to get this off of me. Like, that was not okay. And I thought that was a really brave and beautiful scene. And Leo was so good in it too. I didn't love that I'm George freaking fan though, because I feel like that they do that a lot in TV. It was cute. But that was my one gripe with it. But it was deserved. She earned that. Yeah, that scene was I loved them tying George's arc up like that.
It gave reason for the tension between Vanson, because that's in the finale. So like when the finale opens and those two are being weird yet again, I was like, I'm gonna need someone to treat Nick right. Do I have to call Tom Swift to send him like, come get your boy? But I did like that it was more than PDA. Like it was her not knowing how to negotiate being in a relationship with someone. Because the only point of reference she has is with Ryan, and him not taking accountability at first, like Ryan not taking accountability at first, was like, how do you not understand that you dating a 17-year-old was not okay? He's like, you seemed fine. And it's just like, she wasn't fine.
Yeah, you're the adult in the situation. Your perspective is a lot different. She may seem like she's mature, but we saw in that scene with Nick when she's explaining like everything that she came to, we've never seen George that vulnerable and open. And she's usually so front facing confident. Like she puts on that air. And I mean, that's how she is naturally, but sometimes I think it is a defense mechanism. But she let it all down and let the whole wall down for Nick. And I'll say it again, I love seeing George like that, because I think it was a very deserved full circle arc for the season.
One of my favorite things about the show is how it sometimes buries really, really powerful and meaning storylines like within the main body of the story. So you don't see it coming until it hits you. And this was an example of that. Like Sabrina said, there was an awful lot of uh, inexplicable tension between her and Nick, and it just felt like it kind of came out of nowhere. And then they added some real powerful depth to it. And I know I agree that I thought the penultimate episode was better than the finale, but the George's whole arc in the finale was my favorite part of it, because it was such like a as Reed said, full circle moment. And she really took control of everything of a situation that she felt like she didn't have control of when she was younger. And it really resonated. And not only just like the performances from Leah, but just the writing as well. I know she had her big badass I'm George freaking fan moment at the end, but the dialogue leading up to that was really, really powerful. And I think that ended up being my favorite scene from the finale. And it was probably the most like important scene as far as character goes for George yet.
Mhm.
And the fact that it kind of, like I said, kind of felt like it didn't feel like it came out of nowhere, but it caught me off guard because I didn't think the
Yeah,
show would
that's a
go
better
that
way to
deep.
put it.
Yeah, I didn't. I didn't think the show would go that deep that quickly.
Well, because we don't really see stuff like that in shows.
Mhm.
Like we don't
Mhm.
see someone really taking their power back in that way. And the show was very explicit about it without being like a very special episode, you know.
Mhm.
It was really I'll say it, I keep saying it, but it was very necessary, and
Mhm.
they pulled it off.
They did. And it's good that this was done and contained in this season. That way we can see George grow in
Mhm.
season 2 and figure out how she wants to be in a relationship, because she doesn't know um to how to be in a relationship that's, out in the public. Like it's not he Ryan always kept her behind closed doors. She could only talk to him at certain times. He always made her feel very small. And Nick doesn't do that. And I love that part of Lansing's relationship is George coming into her own and allowing herself to be vulnerable, because she doesn't have a relationship to do that in. She's always the strong one with her mom, with her sisters, even in her friendships. And so in her romance, there's room for her to be vulnerable and not always be okay and be
And allow
open and
herself to
honest.
be taken care of too, because
Yeah.
Mhm.
she's independent, love it, but is she sometimes it can be to a fault. But and Nick is a very like his love language is like acts of service. He like loves to take care of people, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think George is usually like, what that she's like, that's not how I show love. So why are you doing that? Like I take care of everybody else. Um, but yeah, I loved seeing her confront all of that. It was really well done. There were other full circle moments too for characters like Bess. Like she begins the season like desperately wanting to be a Marvin, and now she's a Marvin. In the final like sequence, she's like, I don't know anything about this family. The Iglesias in this painting. Did I make a mistake?
They're not a great family. Maybe you should just call your mama over in London or something and just be happy with her and this found family that you have, because the Marvins they're a trip, and so is Aunt Diana. And it really does seem like this is not about love. This is about hierarchy, and she's also standing with the aunt with the money, and the fact that Bess is walking a fine line in her relationship with Elizabeth for her aunt. I was like, Auntie don't deserve all this. She really don't. Her affection is transactional, and you're going to find that out the hard way. Not that I will say my feelings on Bess and Elizabeth has kind of cooled. Elizabeth sort of just serves a police purpose, and she pops in for conflict for Bess, and that's about it. Like the relationship hasn't progressed past that, and I don't know if it will. But as far as giving Bess a through line of discomfort and not being like the part of the comic relief, that's sort of what Lisbeth and the Marvins serve for her. Same with Owen. I wasn't sad that he died. I was sad that Nancy was upset.
It
And
felt like it was
that's
always going to
it.
happen though. Like
Mhm.
somebody was
Yeah.
going to be a casualty of all this. And but I should I issue an apology to Owen? I was so untrusting of him, and it turns out he was fine.
Yeah, he's apparently a good guy. And I too was like, I'm sorry, Owen.
That was the thing that stayed with me. I was like, we thought this guy was like too good to be true, and it turns out no, he actually was just pretty decent. They used him for every decent storyline they could, and then his run on the show came to an end. He wasn't too good to be true, but he was too good to keep alive, apparently.
So sorry, Owen.
Yeah.
May you rest in peace.
But speaking of Owen's death, did you guys see it coming that it was Josh Dodd or Lucy's?
No.
I didn't
No.
either. I thought it was the Igleika, and we were like, here we are, full steam ahead, next villain.
I didn't like that reveal. I felt like no, who could it be? And it just ends up being Josh. I did like though that Nancy had a scene with Patrice, where she got to tell her grandmother who she is.
When she pulled up to that nursing home again and went in the room, I was like, Nancy, girl,
Not again.
stressed me out the first time you did this, and thankfully it went better. It was dicey in the beginning, but she was like, I'm your granddaughter, and suddenly Patrice was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, she's
I was like, okay,
cool.
well, thank you for not emotionally manipulating the woman this time, Nancy. It all worked out for you.
Wait, Josh is arrested now, right? I realized I tuned out of that part of the story. Okay.
I think they gave Bess that line of dialogue. She was like, thank you for she said it to Elizabeth, thank you for putting Josh in jail.
Okay. Well,
Yeah,
goodbye, Josh.
Yeah. Thought you were dead, but
I know he got very serial killer-y and felt like, I don't want to say it happened overnight, but I know those last few episodes were very closely knitted together as far as the timeline goes. Yeah, I don't know how I felt about that, because she was just finding out this family of hers was her actual family. And then he was even though he was responsible for Tiffany's unfortunate death, you saw the pieces leading up to it, and then he just kind of turned into a serial killer that was like resurrected from the dead. I mean, it plays into the tone of the show, but I mean, like, just with the depth of her story, I don't know whether that gelled as much for me. Maybe there's more story yet to come. I don't know. The season was cut slightly short, if I'm right in thinking. Was it with the 18 episodes? This was around the pandemic shutdown, wasn't it?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's why maybe the penultimate had more finale feels than the actual finale. But yeah, it was a solid, and the show made it work. But yeah, it was a bit of an unusual pivot to like full on serial killer uncle for me overnight.
And I really want them to come to this realization as a unit, as like, it feels like the thing that's brought them all together is that they're all searching for some sort of family, some kinship. Like Bess wants that family connection with her roots, and George has a very turbulent home life, and then Nick doesn't really have anybody. Ace is kind of on his own. Nancy feels very alone. And I want them to realize, like, whatever you're searching for, it's in this group of 5 people. Like, you found it, you have it. And maybe they have realized it and they're not saying it explicitly, which is like obviously great writing, because like we can see it happening. But I want them to come to that understanding that like they don't need to search elsewhere. They've got it. They have each other. They're their own family now. They've been through too much to to not be a family at this point.
I'm hoping that that is what we see in the opening for season 2, since they all saw themselves die in very traumatic ways. So like, just sharing circle. Like, I don't care whose house it is, but like tell each other what happened. I think the one that was like, oh, we need a trigger warning. To me, it was when Ace's death. I was like, when I saw his feet dangling, I was like, oh no.
Yeah, that was a lot.
It got worse. It was quite a lot. None of them deserve to die that way. I do wonder if that is going to play into season 2. If there's a specific reason why they all were shown that way of dying, or if it just was proximity. Like Bess was near a fire, therefore she's on fire. Ace was near the freezer, therefore the meat hook. Like, I don't know. The Aglega is going to be really interesting as a villain. It's hard to call it. She's vengeful. I don't really know if I want to call her a villain. It just seems like you didn't pay her toll, so now you're gonna have to deal with it.
And they thought they got away when they saved Josh. They're like, oh, maybe this will tip the scales. And it's like, I don't know if it works that way, guys.
No. Very angry.
I did appreciate the closing montage, even if it was quite traumatizing, because it reminded me, even if this was something of an unplanned finale, it reminded me of how the show opened. The first 2 pilot part 1 and pilot part 2, as we call it, both ended with those like dramatic monologues of like, this is the world we're in, this is what the future looks like. And that was very much the vibe I got from the finale montage there. It is going to be interesting to see how big a role the Iglesias will play here. Is this just the remnants of the season 1 villain carried over, or are we dealing with full on season 2 big bad? Either way, totally on board. It's going to be an interesting pivot from like the realistic murder mystery, especially since we did solve the other realistic murder mystery in Owen's demise. But yeah, we've got some interesting stories to look forward to in season 2. And I feel like the only thing we didn't really get into is the Nancy and Ace moments, because that one where Nancy was like, she has a lot of stuff to unpack, and when I find the words, I'll tell you them. I feel like if you haven't seen the crumbs, you certainly saw them after that, right?
Yeah, that was like a sandwich. That was
yeah, because the crumbs were like all the ways in which he was like checking in on her just by looking. Again, he's really supportive. Like Nace, I feel like for Nace, Ace's position, at least right now, is being the person that's not really requiring anything of Nancy. Like if she needs someone to lean on, that's Ace. Like, and he's still like him. I love that he's still sort of comic relief too around her, like the blue jars, and he's like, no sign of Tinkerbell. And she's kind of just,
and when he pulled up, I don't remember which episode it was, but when he pulled up and he was like, get in.
And then he called Owen looking for her too, because he knew where she would be.
Yeah. He's the one that can really disarm her. And I'm not totally sure if I think they're aware of their connection or if it just exists, because they do have a comfort with each other that I'm not sure that they realize what it means. Do you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't seem like they're fully aware that there's a deeper connection there.
Yeah.
And it's pretty, that's what people love about shipping, right?
Yeah. And because I feel like when the show started, they were the one that had the least kind of dynamic. You know, George and Nancy had the history from high school. And Nick and Nancy were obviously in a relationship, and Bess was this unusual character that Nancy kind of connected to right away. So that kind of left Ace out, not out in the cold, but he was the one that she didn't have a specific relationship with. And I feel like as the season's gone on and the two of them have been investigating things together, and very much in a Scooby-Doo scenario, whereas like you three split up and we'll do this, Nancy and Ace always ended up paired off. So they've kind of come together by I think the thing that drew them together is just that they're a great team and they can clearly trust each other, which just kind of feels like it came out of nowhere, I'm sure, to Nancy, because like she didn't have that relationship with him. So I just feel like it's kind of happened to them too without them realizing it. They haven't forced this, they haven't addressed this, and it's just all happened really naturally for them. And I think now, I don't even know if they're realizing it yet, but I know the viewers would be. They're starting to realize that they do make a great double act and there's some chemistry there and there is a kinship. And these two would not have described each other as friends in the early going, and now they've really connected, which is great to say.
Yeah, I agree. There's not an awareness. I will say though that I felt from the pilot that Nancy likes Ace. It's just the way that she is around him. Like when she walks into the kitchen for the first time, it's the way she looks at him before she veers off into the rest of it. And just the amount, like Reed, you had spoken to like her emotional intelligence, at least in regards to herself. I do think she has a lot of that, but I'm not sure if she does when it comes to how her feelings towards romance.
Oh yeah, romance. She needs a roadmap. She's lost.
Yeah, because honestly, I was like, you like him. You're not there yet realizing it, but you do. I think it's much easier for her to connect to attraction first. And she's attracted to Nick and she's attracted to Owen. Not to say that she's not attracted to Ace, but there is a level of comfort there in kinship and connection that doesn't need to transcend if she doesn't want it to. Like she's able to like do a back and forth, but with Ace there isn't a back and forth. It just feels really warm.
Sorry, did I interrupt you? Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I always said that the two of them, or she was kind of intrigued by him. And I think that's maybe why she's connected with him so well. She's such a detective and she figures people out. And when she can't figure people out, she tries to figure them out. And with S, I think he's just such an unusual character. She's always been intrigued from. And I think as the season's gone on, that's turned into a real endearment. You'll see like when he says something funny and everyone just stops and she just kind of looks at him. It's almost like you're waiting on the laugh track to kick in, and then she just moves on because she doesn't know what to make of him. And like in the library episode when the two of them went investigating on the computer together, and he started telling her about how he did this and how he did that and how he created this firewall and this safe wall, she just kind of looked at him and was like, why would you do that? She doesn't know what to make of him. And I think that intrigued mind that she has turned into an endearment over time.
And to your guys' point, I think he requires less from her. Like he understands her, whereas I mean Nick and Ace are very different in the way that they approach relationships. Nick, and this isn't a good or bad thing, he needs to be seen a little bit more. And Nancy, we've talked about this a lot, she couldn't really give him that, whereas it feels like Ace understands her in a little bit different way. Like he knows how she is and what the space that she requires sometimes, and he doesn't always need to be what's like reassured or like anything. Like they just have this connection, and I think it all comes down to just what Nick and Ace need, that and what Nancy can provide. I do think she's getting a little bit better, but she is pretty much who she is. What you see is what you get. She's always on the run. She's always go, go, go. And either you're on board or you're not.
Yeah, because with Nick, he's very hands-on. He has to be like, he's like a blanket, hot cup, like a hot cup of coffee, or like what am I thinking of? Hot chocolate or something. He has to be the one to like take care of you.
Yeah, he's like a caretaker in a way.
He is.
And that's not a bad thing. I'll just keep saying it's not a bad thing at all.
It's a really lovely thing. It's just not what Nancy can handle. It's too much for her. Like she doesn't want your blanket. She doesn't want your hot chocolate. She prefer what Ace does, which is Ace is kind of just, he's there, right? He'll sit in a chair. If you want to talk, you want to talk.
But he's not a pushover. He'll be the one that says, get in the car. We need you.
Yeah.
He'll be the one to tell her what she needs to hear, but he's also going to be the one that's like, I'm here whenever you need me, and not in like a transactional way or like you can use me, but in a way that's very caring.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's really lovely actually that the love languages on this show are treated as equal. Like obviously sometimes you don't mesh with people or you have a great connection like Nick and Nancy did. It's just they didn't mesh with what they need right now in their lives. Like
yeah, timing, like you said, right now, timing is a big thing. And over the course of 18 episodes, all of their lives have changed in
so much
in different ways. So who Nancy was in episode 1 is not who she is in episode 18. So, but who's to say that if Nick and Nancy were to try now, who knows if that would have been better or worse than when they did happen. This just got really deep.
Yeah, it did. But I think it's just because Nancy Drew is a very deep show. I think to answer your question, I don't think they'd work right now either.
Yeah,
it's
I don't
just
think they
too
would.
much. It's just, he's
too much has happened. Too much has happened.
I know. But I'll still love Drewson forever. Even the Nace is like, I get it. I do. I think I'll be there, like fully there. The way truly these writers love them because it's very romantic how they've written them, but like a slow burn romantic thing. There's just, it's gonna pay off when we get to that part. Like it just, all the seeds and scenes, it's gonna be amazing.
Storytelling.
I'm looking forward to seeing how Nancy and Nick's friendship evolves over the next 2 seasons, because
best friends.
Yeah, because now he's in a relationship with somebody else who she's also close to, and I think that evolution will be really great to watch. They can all grow from this, and I think they all have bigger fish to fry that they probably should not be too concerned about who's dating who.
That's true, but the emotions are messy. But I think it'll actually be fine. I do think they're gonna end up being best friends. I like the moment where he tells Ace to stay with Nancy, and he goes over to be what George needs him to be. And I was like, I still get content. Hey, well, that is the end of season 1 for us, though. I mean, it was a ride. It was a fantastic ride. It was beautiful. It was like one of the best things CW has ever done.
An incredible first season.
Mhm.
An incredible first season.
Just
Absolutely.
amazing.
Yeah. I loved it. I'm so glad we finally started the show, because we've talked about it for so long, and like it was absolutely worth the wait. And I know maybe statistically that was a cut short first season, but like it didn't feel like it in the slightest. Everything came together. The story panned out. The mystery was so worthwhile, and so much character work in the first season. I'm not sure I expected that level of it, considering it's quite the big cast. Oh, on board and ready for season 2.
When we're gonna catch up, we will in time for when
It's gonna happen.
It's gonna happen. But yeah, on board for season 2, and just to toast Nancy Drew in general, and for the season 1, because it is. If you haven't watched it, I'm sure if you're watching the review, you have watched Nancy Drew. But if you haven't and you're still listening to the pod, you should change that. It's on HBO Max. Seasons 1 through 3. Season 4 is premiering next year, likely in January. That we don't have a premiere date yet.
Come join us. Yeah, Toast and Nancy, come join us in Horseshoe Bay. It's a messy place, but it's worthwhile.